Imagine yourself, alone, on a night darker than any other, the rain pouring relentlessly, tapping against the windows like fingers trying to get in. The streets are empty, deserted, not a single soul in sight. You think you're safe, sheltered inside, just listening to the rain. But then there's this feeling, a strange sense, like you're not as alone as you thought. It's faint at first, just a whisper of unease, but it grows. Suddenly, you realize you're being watched. Every shadow, every creak feels like it's hiding something or someone. This is a true story, a terrifying encounter that changed everything, that left me questioning reality itself. It was the kind of night that seemed to absorb every sound, every movement, like the world itself was holding its breath. The rain wasn't just falling, it was relentless, hammering down in waves that blurred the streets and clung to every surface. Water pooled along the empty sidewalks, swirling down storm drains, carrying with it leaves and scraps that rustled in the gutters, their faint movements somehow amplified in the silence. The air felt thick, dense with dampness, and a strange heaviness that weighed on my chest, as if pressing me into place, keeping me from moving, from breathing too loudly. The houses along the street stood in rows, their windows dark, and even though they were familiar during the day, they looked almost unfamiliar now, stripped of warmth, standing like silent watchers. The rain caught the faint glimmer of streetlights, casting narrow beams across the road, but every few steps one light would buzz, flicker, then go dark. Shadows stretched long across the street, transforming every ordinary corner into something unknown, something deeper and darker than I'd ever seen. Each shadow seemed to pulse, almost alive, as if it held its own secrets, and each time the lights flickered, the shapes would shift, like they were hiding something just beyond what I could see. And the sound of the rain, it wasn't just background noise anymore. It was everywhere, filling the air, seeping into the ground, and pounding against the walls. It was like the rain had become its own presence, constant and unyielding, a rhythm that echoed in my ears, drowning out any sense of distance, of space. There was no break in it, no pause to catch my breath, just the unending, hammering beat. And as I stood there alone, I could almost swear the silence beneath the rain held something more, something waiting. As I stood there, the rain coming down harder, I couldn't shake the prickling feeling along the back of my neck, that undeniable sense of being watched. It was subtle at first, like a lingering shadow just out of sight, an instinct I couldn't explain. I tried to ignore it, to push it away, telling myself it was just nerves, just the unsettling quiet of a late night and a storm pressing down. But every step I took, it was there, gnawing at me, growing stronger, like invisible eyes following my every move. Up ahead, I thought I saw something, a quick, fleeting shape slipping across the road, moving too fast for me to truly see. Just for a moment, it crossed under the faint light, a dark figure that vanished as quickly as it appeared. I stopped, squinting into the rain, watching the empty street, waiting for some sign, some confirmation that I wasn't alone. But there was nothing. Only the rain drenching the road, the cold trickle running down my collar, and the empty, hollow silence surrounding me. My mind raced, every logical thought unraveling as I wondered, was someone there? Was it my imagination? I took a few careful steps forward, listening intently. And that's when I began to notice it, the faintest sound beneath the rain, something too quiet to be part of the storm. Soft, deliberate footsteps, just far enough to make me question them, but close enough that I could hear, as if they were pacing me, matching each of my steps with their own. I paused, barely breathing, my heart pounding in my chest as I listened, straining to make sense of it. And then, silence. Nothing but the unbroken rhythm of raindrops all around. I took another step, and there it was again, a faint tap, tap, tap behind me, steady and patient, too subtle to be an echo, too deliberate to be random. My mind played with possibilities. Maybe it was just the rain falling from an awning, maybe a loose shutter tapping in the wind. But each time I tried to explain it away, the sound would stop the moment I did, as if it were waiting, watching, following. Then another sound reached me, a rustling, something soft scraping along the wet ground just out of sight, like leaves skittering across the road. Only there weren't any leaves. My eyes darted around, trying to catch a glimpse, any hint of movement in the darkness. And then there was something. A faint shift of a shadow at the edge of my vision, quick and elusive, slipping behind a street lamp. I turned, but by the time my eyes adjusted, it was gone. Was it just the play of light, the rain casting strange reflections, or was there something lurking, hiding just out of reach? I tried to steady my breath, telling myself it was all in my head, but then there was a whisper, a low murmur, barely audible above the storm, like a breath of sound carried on the wind. It was faint, almost too soft to hear, but unmistakable, like someone muttering just under their breath, just loud enough to send a chill down my spine. I froze, listening, straining to catch even a single word, but it faded into the background, leaving only the echo of its presence. Was it real? Or was my mind playing tricks on me, twisting the silence into something darker? I quickened my pace, feeling the rain slide down my face, the cold settling in, but that feeling, that nagging sense of something following, it only grew stronger. Each streetlight I passed felt like a checkpoint, like I was being guided, watched, each flicker of the light casting new shadows that danced and warped around me. At one point, I thought I saw movement in the reflection of a shop window, a figure slipping just out of view, a flash of dark, wet fabric. I whipped around, but there was nothing there, just me and the rain and the empty, hollow street. And then I heard it again, that soft, rhythmic tapping, closer this time, slow and patient, like it was waiting for me to notice, daring me to turn around. My hands were trembling now, my heart a heavy thud in my chest as I forced myself to look, to face whatever was following. But again, there was nothing, just the rain, pooling around my feet, stretching out into the darkness as far as I could see. And yet the feeling persisted, that quiet, unshakable certainty that I wasn't alone. I kept moving, faster now, my steps echoing against the walls, but with every step, the sound of those faint trailing footsteps followed. I was sure of it now, sure that someone, or something, was there, mirroring my every move, lingering just beyond the edge of light. I could almost feel it, the weight of its presence pressing in on me, each flicker of light revealing empty shadows that felt anything but empty. The rain seemed to grow colder, sharper, each drop stinging like a needle against my skin. My thoughts raced, every instinct urging me to run, to find shelter, but I didn't want to turn my back on whatever was out there. I couldn't shake the feeling that if I did, if I stopped paying attention, it would close in step by step until it was right there, just a breath away. And that whisper, that soft, elusive murmur, drifted back to me, like a voice calling from the depths, a voice that shouldn't be there, a voice that left me questioning everything I thought I knew about what was real. I don't know why I stopped. The rain was still pouring, soaking me through, but something, some instinct I can't fully explain, made me pause. I took a breath, tried to ground myself, feeling the cold droplets slide down my face, the air thick and wet in my lungs. Maybe I was just tired, tired of looking over my shoulder, of feeling that creeping dread that something was lurking just out of sight. So I turned to look around just once, hoping to ease that feeling, to reassure myself that it was just the rain, the shadows playing tricks. But then through the streaks of rain and fog glass I saw it, just beyond the window of a small, darkened shop. A figure, standing there, still as stone, watching. At first it was only a shadow, vague, almost shapeless, something I could barely make out. But as I focused, the outline became clearer, sharper, like it was materializing right in front of me, solidifying out of the darkness. I couldn't make out any details, just that it was tall, unmoving, and wrong. It was like my brain couldn't quite process what I was seeing, like some part of me refused to accept it. I wanted to turn away, to keep walking, but something about that figure kept my gaze locked. I stood there, rain dripping down my face, the sound of my own heartbeat in my ears, feeling that presence watching me, studying me, and I couldn't look away. Slowly, it leaned forward, just a bit closer to the glass, and the dim light from a nearby street lamp caught the edge of what seemed like a face. But it wasn't a face, not in the way we understand. There were no features, nothing human that I could make sense of, just a blankness where eyes should have been, where a mouth might have been. And yet, somehow, I knew it was staring right at me. Not blinking, not moving, just fixed on me, like I was the only thing in its world. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. This was real. I was sure of it. My skin prickled, every hair standing on end as a chill swept through me. It felt like the temperature around me had dropped, the rain now colder, biting into my skin. I tried to swallow, to move, to break the trance that had me frozen in place, but my legs wouldn't obey. My body felt rooted to the spot, held by that silent, unyielding stare. As I stared back, transfixed, the figure shifted. Just a tiny movement, a slight tilt of the head, as if acknowledging my presence, as if it knew that I was looking right at it. My mind screamed for me to turn, to run, to do anything other than stand there, but I felt like I was caught in a web, tangled in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. And as it leaned just a fraction closer, pressing against the glass, the rain seemed to intensify, almost as if it, too, was reacting to this presence, amplifying the tension that filled the air. And then it happened. A sudden deafening crash shattered the silence, echoing through the empty street, making me jump, my heart lurching in my chest. My eyes darted to the side, searching for the source of the noise, but I saw nothing, just empty windows, shadows, the rain hammering down. But the figure, it hadn't moved. Not a single inch. It was as if it was immune to the sound, to the world around it, as if it existed on a different plane, somewhere between the darkness and the light, somewhere that defied logic. That's when I noticed it was closer. Somehow, without me seeing it move, it had shifted nearer to the window, its form now pressed up against the glass, just inches from where I stood. The face, or the absence of one, was right there, close enough that I should have been able to make out details, but all I could see was darkness, an endless void that seemed to swallow any light that touched it. I could feel its gaze piercing through me, even without eyes, as if it could see deeper than skin, right down to the core of who I was. My breathing grew ragged, shallow, each breath catching in my throat. My entire body felt like it was gripped by a cold, invisible hand, every muscle locked in place. I wanted to move, to look away, to escape, but all I could do was stare, helpless, as it seemed to reach for me. Not with arms, not with anything physical, but with an energy, a presence that filled the air, pressing against my skin, against my mind, like a weight that grew heavier with each passing second. Finally, in a moment of sheer panic, I forced myself to look away, breaking the spell just for an instant. I stumbled back, my hand gripping the edge of a nearby bench to steady myself, feeling the cold metal bite into my palm. I glanced back toward the window, expecting to see nothing, hoping that maybe, somehow, it was all in my head, a trick of the rain and the shadows. But the figure was still there, closer, watching me, relentless, patient, as if it had all the time in the world. I could feel my heart pounding against my ribs, my pulse racing, my thoughts spiraling as I tried to understand what was happening. I took a shaky step back, then another, each movement slow, careful, as if sudden motion might provoke it, might somehow draw it out from behind the glass. But even as I retreated, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still reaching for me, pulling me back with an invisible thread. I turned, finally, forcing myself to walk away, but that sense of dread followed me, pressing against my back, my every step feeling heavier, like I was moving through a thick fog. I could still feel its gaze burning into me, as if it could see through the walls, through the rain, never letting me go. And as I glanced over my shoulder one last time, I thought I saw it, just a shadow, just a shape, standing there in the rain waiting, like it knew I'd be back, like it knew we weren't done yet. I kept walking, each step slower than the last, trying to steady my breath, to keep my mind clear. The rain was still pouring down, relentless, each drop echoing off the pavement in a steady beat that felt almost hypnotic. The streetlights cast faint pools of light along the sidewalk, flickering now and then, but mostly steady, offering some small sense of normalcy in the midst of this strange, endless night. For a moment, I let myself believe it was over, that whatever I'd seen, whatever I'd heard, was just a fragment of my imagination, something conjured up by exhaustion and the empty streets. I could feel my heart rate start to slow, my mind beginning to settle. I took in a deep breath of the cold, damp air, feeling it fill my lungs, trying to convince myself that everything was fine, that I was safe. It was just a storm, I told myself. Just rain and shadows, nothing more. I focused on my footsteps, the sound of my shoes splashing in the puddles, grounding myself with each step. The world around me felt quiet, calm. There was nothing to fear. But then, a soft rustling sound caught my attention. It was faint, almost drowned out by the rain, but unmistakable. I stopped, listening, straining to hear. The sound seemed to come from somewhere nearby, like something brushing against wet leaves, a gentle scraping against the pavement. I turned my head slowly, searching the darkness for any sign of movement, but all I saw were empty sidewalks, the dim glow of streetlights, the endless rain. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was nothing, but that small flicker of fear had crept back in, a quiet whisper at the edge of my mind. I took a few more steps, trying to ignore it, trying to keep moving, but with each step the sound grew louder, clearer, a soft tapping, irregular, almost like footsteps, but not quite. My pulse quickened, the calm I'd felt just moments ago slipping away, replaced by that same gnawing dread. I told myself it was just the rain, just water dripping off a rooftop or a tree branch shifting in the wind, but deep down, I knew it was something else, something that didn't belong in this quiet, empty street. I stopped again, standing there in the rain, my heart pounding, waiting, and for a moment, silence. Nothing but the steady rhythm of the rain, the hum of the streetlights, the quiet of the empty night. I let out a shaky breath, relief flooding over me, convinced once again that I was alone, that there was nothing lurking in the shadows. But as I started to walk, I heard it, that faint, whispering sound, drifting through the rain like a voice, low and soft, just beyond the edge of hearing. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was so quiet, almost like it wasn't there at all, but I could feel it pressing against me, filling the space around me, an invisible presence lingering just beyond my reach. I tried to listen, tried to make sense of the words, but it was nothing more than a murmur, a faint, indecipherable echo, slipping away as soon as I focused on it. I wanted to turn back, to look behind me, to prove to myself that it was nothing, but I couldn't bring myself to move. It was as if that whisper had rooted me to the spot, holding me in place, forcing me to listen. Finally, I broke free, shaking my head, pushing myself forward, trying to put as much distance as I could between myself and whatever that sound was. I kept walking, faster now, each step splashing through the puddles, my footsteps echoing in the silence. I tried to focus on the sound of my own breathing, the feel of the rain against my skin, anything to drown out that creeping dread. And for a while, it seemed to work. The street stretched on, quiet, still, the rain washing over everything, a blanket of calm that almost felt comforting. But as I reached the end of the street, the lights flickered again, casting strange shadows that danced across the pavement. I glanced around, trying to keep my focus, to remind myself that it was just the storm, just the weather playing tricks on me. But then, just as the light steadied, I saw it. A shape, a dark figure standing at the far end of the street, barely visible through the rain. It was still, unmoving, but somehow I knew it was watching me. My heart pounded, my pulse racing as I took a step back, my mind reeling. I blinked, hoping it would disappear, but when I looked again, it was gone. Only the empty street, the rain, the flickering lights. I tried to laugh it off, to brush it aside as nothing, just a shadow act, just my mind playing tricks on me. But that sense of unease lingered, stronger than ever, wrapping around me like a cold fog. I started to walk again, faster now, my footsteps quick and nervous, every sense on edge, every nerve screaming that something was wrong. I told myself to calm down, to keep moving, to focus on the path ahead. But then I heard it. Footsteps, soft, steady, just behind me. I quickened my pace, listening, waiting, hoping it was just an echo. But the steps only grew louder, keeping perfect pace with mine. I glanced over my shoulder, expecting to see nothing, to prove to myself that it was all in my head. But as I looked back, I saw it. Just for a split second, a dark shape slipping into the shadows, disappearing before I could make sense of it. My breath caught, my skin prickling as I turned back, my mind racing. I wanted to run, to get away, but every step felt heavier, slower, like something was holding me back, dragging me down. As I walked, the footsteps faded, replaced by a different sound, a soft creaking like a door slowly opening or floorboards shifting underfoot. It was close, so close I could almost feel it, like it was right there beside me, hidden just out of sight. I turned, searching the darkness, desperate to find the source of the noise. But all I saw were empty streets, the rain pouring down, the faint glow of the streetlights. I tried to breathe, to calm myself, to steady my nerves, but that sound, it wouldn't stop. It was everywhere, surrounding me, filling the air like a faint, ghostly echo that followed me wherever I went. I kept moving, each step more frantic than the last, my heart racing, my mind spinning as I tried to escape the sound, to leave it behind. But every time I thought I was free, every time I thought the nightmare was over, the sound would start again. A soft whisper, a quiet footstep, a shadow at the edge of my vision. And with each sound, each flicker of movement, I felt that dread grow stronger, that sense that something was watching, following, waiting for the right moment to show itself. I finally stopped, standing in the middle of the street, rain pouring down, my entire body trembling. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and tried to gather the courage to face whatever was out there. But as I opened my eyes, I realized it was gone. The footsteps, the whispers, the shadows, everything had disappeared, leaving only silence, only the rain. And for the first time, I felt a strange sense of relief, a weight lifting from my shoulders as I let out a shaky breath. But just as I turned to leave, a faint voice drifted through the air, so close it felt like it was right next to me. I froze, my breath catching as I listened, trying to make out the words. But there was nothing, only a soft, haunting whisper that faded into the night, leaving me alone, standing in the rain, with a dread I couldn't shake, a fear that I knew would follow me long after this night was over. I felt a tightening in my chest, each step heavier than the last, as if the very air around me had turned solid. I wanted to keep moving, to push through the feeling that had settled over me like a shadow. I took one shaky breath, then another, and tried to convince myself it was almost over. I was almost free from whatever strange force had been haunting me through this rain-soaked night. The street stretched out ahead of me, empty, silent. But deep down, I felt it, that something was wrong. As I rounded the next corner, I felt an icy grip of dread tighten around me. My pulse quickened, my skin prickling, as if the air itself was charged with some unseen, menacing presence. I didn't want to look up. Every instinct told me to keep my head down, to keep walking, to keep moving forward without stopping. But something else, some overwhelming need to confront what had been following me, pulled at me. I forced myself to look up, and that's when I saw it. It stood there, right in my path, as if it had been waiting for this moment, as if it knew exactly where I would be. This wasn't a fleeting shadow, or a trick of the light. It was there, solid and real, blocking my way. The figure was tall, draped in darkness, a silhouette against the flickering streetlights that cast a dim, shifting glow around it. But it wasn't the shape that terrified me. It was the way it seemed to draw the light in, swallowing every bit of brightness around it, until nothing else existed in my field of vision. The air grew colder, an unnatural chill that cut right through me, wrapping around my bones, filling me with a dread so deep it felt like it would pull me under. I couldn't move, I couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare, my mind screaming at me to look away, to turn and run, but my body wouldn't obey. I was trapped, caught in its gaze, unable to tear my eyes from that dark, blank face. There were no eyes, no features I could recognize, just an endless void where a face should have been, staring back at me with an intensity that defied any sense of reality. And yet, I felt it. I felt its eyes on me, burning into me, seeing every fear, every thought, every heartbeat. Slowly, as if savoring every second, the figure began to lean forward, just the faintest movement, but enough to send a wave of cold terror flooding through me. It was like the space between us was shrinking, closing in, though neither of us moved. I felt like I was sinking, like the ground was giving way beneath me, and I had nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. Its arms stretched out, reaching for me, and I could feel the weight of it, like an invisible grip tightening around my chest, squeezing, pulling me closer. I wanted to scream, to break free, but the harder I tried, the stronger that grip became, pressing in, suffocating me, until it felt like I was drowning in a sea of darkness. As it came closer, I felt a chill unlike anything I'd ever known, so intense, so complete, that it seemed to drain every bit of warmth from my body, from my soul. My hands were shaking, my legs numb, as if the cold had frozen me in place. The rain around us seemed to fade, each drop slowing, each sound muffled, until the world was silent. All I could hear was the pounding of my own heartbeat, a frantic, terrified rhythm that echoed in my ears, a sound that seemed to grow louder, faster, as the figure closed the final inches between us. I was trapped, caught in its pull, helpless as it drew nearer, closer, until I could feel its presence pressing against my skin, wrapping around me, pulling me deeper into that unending darkness. I wanted to look away, to break free from its gaze, but every part of me was frozen, locked in place, as if that shadow had become a part of me, a force that I couldn't escape, no matter how hard I tried. And then, in an instant, everything shifted. There was a sudden, deafening crash, a noise so loud it shattered the silence, snapping me out of the trance. My heart leapt, my entire body jolting back as I stumbled, gasping, the spell broken for just a moment. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, to understand what had just happened, but when I looked up again, it was gone. The figure had vanished, leaving nothing but empty space where it had been, as if it had never existed at all. I stood there, drenched, trembling, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. The rain was falling again, heavier now, each drop sharp against my skin, but I could still feel the echo of that cold, still gripping me, refusing to let go. I wanted to believe it was over, that whatever had haunted me through this night was gone. But as I took a shaky step forward, I knew it wasn't that simple. That figure, that darkness, it hadn't left. It was still there, somewhere, waiting, watching, its presence lingering in the shadows, a reminder that this night was far from over. Eventually, somehow, I made it home. I remember closing the door behind me, turning the lock, and standing there in silence, rainwater pooling around my feet as I tried to steady my breathing. Everything felt surreal, as though I'd walked back into a world that was somehow less real than what I'd left behind in the rain-soaked darkness. I flicked on every light, as if brightness alone could banish the memory of what I'd seen, of what had followed me. I sat there, trying to convince myself it was over, that I was safe now. But even then, with the walls of my own home surrounding me, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had followed me, that I hadn't really left it behind. For the first few nights, sleep was nearly impossible. I'd close my eyes and see that shape, that figure, looming out of the shadows, staring back at me with that empty, unblinking face. The cold would creep in again, an echo of the icy grip I'd felt in the street, and I'd find myself jolting awake, shivering, drenched in sweat despite the warmth of my room. I'd lie there, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself it was all a nightmare, just shadows and rain playing tricks. But deep down, that gnawing feeling persisted, like a quiet whisper in the back of my mind, reminding me that something had seen me, that it had reached out, touched me, in a way that left an imprint, something I couldn't just shake off. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my routine, trying to forget, to push the memory as far from my mind as possible. But little things would bring it back. Walking down the street on a cloudy day, catching my reflection in a rain-streaked window, the flicker of a streetlight on a darkened road, every small shadow, every passing figure out of the corner of my eye would send a shiver through me, a reminder that the fear hadn't really left. Sometimes I'd stop, heart pounding, feeling that same icy grip for just a moment, wondering if it was real, if maybe that shadow was still out there, watching, waiting. Then came the rain. The first time a storm rolled in after that night, I felt my chest tighten, a familiar chill settling over me. I watched as the sky darkened, clouds pressing low, thunder rumbling in the distance, and something inside me stirred, a mixture of dread and anticipation, like some part of me knew that whatever I'd encountered hadn't really left. As the rain began to fall, I found myself standing by the window, watching it pour down, memories flooding back. And there in the reflection, just for a moment, I thought I saw it again. A shadow standing at the end of the street, just a faint outline against the rain. I blinked, tried to focus, but it was gone, leaving only the empty road stretching out into the darkness. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was still haunted by that night, that fear had left a mark on my mind that hadn't yet faded. But each time it rained, the feeling returned, stronger, more certain. I'd feel eyes on me, an invisible presence just outside my vision, watching, waiting. At first I brushed it off, but the pattern became impossible to ignore. The shadows felt longer, darker, as if they carried something within them, something familiar. Each time I turned, expecting to see only the rain and the empty street, but the silence felt heavy, like it was hiding something just beyond what I could see. There was one night, weeks later, when the rain was coming down harder than ever, hammering against the windows, drowning out every other sound. I'd settled down, trying to read, to lose myself in something else, but the steady rhythm of the storm kept pulling my focus back. And then I felt it. That same sense of being watched, of something waiting, lingering just out of sight. I got up, almost instinctively, drawn to the window, peering through the streaks of water as the rain poured down. And there, just barely visible through the downpour, was a shadow, a figure standing still, unmoving, in the same spot I'd glimpsed before. I wanted to tell myself it wasn't real, that it was just my mind replaying the nightmare, but the feeling in my chest, that cold, creeping dread, told me otherwise. I watched, frozen, unable to look away, waiting for the figure to vanish, to prove that it was all in my head. But it stayed, just a dark outline in the rain, as if it knew I was there, as if it had been waiting all along. Eventually, I backed away, closing the curtains, blocking out the sight of it. I tried to ignore the fear gnawing at me, the feeling that whatever it was, it hadn't finished with me. That night, as I lay in bed, the rain still pounding against the roof, I found myself listening, half expecting to hear the faint whisper of footsteps, the sound of something approaching, slipping into my house, unseen. The hours passed, my mind racing, replaying every detail of that night, every chilling moment, as I wondered, was it real? Had I truly seen something? Or was it just my mind, haunted by fear and shadows? And now, even today, on rainy nights, that feeling never fully goes away. I try to convince myself that it's just a memory, that whatever I'd seen, whatever had followed me is gone. But sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'll catch a glimpse, a shadow slipping behind a tree, a dark figure standing at the end of the street, barely visible in the storm. Each time, I tell myself it's nothing, just my mind playing tricks. But that cold fear returns like a ghost of that night, a reminder of something I can't fully escape. Was it all just an illusion, a trick of light and darkness, of rain and shadows? Or did something truly follow me, something that still waits, hidden in the night, watching from a place I can never quite see? I'll never really know. But sometimes, on nights like these, with the rain pouring down, I wonder, and I can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, waiting, just beyond the edge of light. What do you think? Was it all in my mind? Or was there truly something out there that night, something still waiting in the shadows? So now, after hearing my story, let me ask you, what would you have done if you found yourself alone on a night like that? Imagine it, just you, with nothing but the rain falling around you, empty streets stretching out into the darkness. At first, it's just shadows, the familiar sounds of a storm, the wind, the soft patter of rain. But then there's that feeling, that chill, creeping up your spine, whispering that something isn't right. Would you have tried to ignore it, brushed it off as nerves? Or would you have stopped, looked closer, listened? Have you ever had that sensation like you're being watched, even when you're alone? That lingering sense, just out of sight, that someone or something is nearby, waiting, hidden in the quiet. Maybe it's just a trick of the mind, a shadow on the wall, a noise you can't quite place. Or maybe it's something else, something you can't explain. I'd love to know what you think. Have you ever felt that way? Tell me your stories in the comments. What would you have done in my place? Or have you ever experienced anything like this? I'll be reading every word. And if stories like these pull you in, if you find yourself wondering about the shadows, about what lies just beyond the light, I invite you to join us. Go ahead and hit that like button if you enjoyed this tale, or if it left you with a shiver. And make sure to subscribe if you haven't already, because there's so much more waiting. When you click that notification bell, you'll be the first to know when a new story comes out, each one uncovering something strange, something unsettling, something real. Whether it's late-night encounters, eerie experiences, or unexplainable tales, we're only just beginning, and there's so much more waiting in the dark. So, come back anytime you're looking for a chill, a story to keep you on edge, or a reason to look over your shoulder. Because sometimes reality holds far more mysteries than we care to imagine. And as long as there are shadows and empty streets, there will always be stories to tell.